So this is a test, eh? This is me talking to you today. Today is the 7th, Saturday the 7th of December 2013. And I sit here today talking to myself in front of a camera. And you're probably asking yourselves, why would that be? And, I'd have to ask the same question as well. Why would that be? I guess it has something to do with the fact that I'm sat here alone, and I have been for the last couple of days now. I'm in the house that I'm renting a room from. Dan's gone away. He's gone to Thailand with his missus, who's just married. She's a local lassie. He's an English lad, Essex. He's a good lad, you know? Real good lad. I ended up here a few months ago now, after something ended for me, which was a relationship I got into with a lassie called Ray, an American girl, who I met some months ago now, so 6, maybe 7 months ago now, probably more than that actually. And it was just at the end of the Filipino insurgency here in Sabah, and there was an Australian counterpart that I was working with, a guy called Shane, who's a brother in arms, as it were. And anyway, I met up with this lassie, and we ended up getting to know each other pretty well, eh? Anyway, the relationship between us ended, and I ended up here because this was a friend of hers who was willing to put me up and split us up, as it were, give ourselves space, give myself time. That's what Ray wanted, was time. Fix herself up, and as she said in an email, which was to get back to the way she used to be, or if possible, even become a better person. Well, as time has gone by, I've had to fix myself up. I got to the point of pretty much close to death, actually, which is pretty bad to say. But I was reborn from the ashes. I sit in front of you now, telling you the story, telling you part of the story anyway. But I tell you what, it's been a real roller coaster ride for me. I've been back in Sabah, Asia, Borneo, and it's coming up to maybe a year and a half now. Back. I've been doing runs over to Brunei. Some crazy stuff has gone on since I came back to Sabah. I guess it's one of the reasons why I come back to Asia and Sabah, because it's never really changing. It's always pretty. It's never really a standard time for me here. Somehow I always end up in an adventure. And I suppose an adventure is good in life. That's what we want, adventure. Is that what we want? Not everybody wants adventure. Okay, so I'll correct that. But for myself, even when I try and stay in the shadows, I end up somehow finding myself in scenarios and situations which are normally, I suppose one could class them as a little bit beyond your average scale. It's pretty much the story of my life, I suppose. I've done the average. I did that pretty badly. And then I sort of stepped over the mark. And now I find myself going past that element, going past the norm of the third dimensional reality, you know, that when we talk about the matrix and normal everyday life. probably the hardest thing I've had to deal with, realistically, believe it or not. For me, it's beyond that. I see life very differently. I always have, I suppose. Something to do with dyslexia, and I'm being born slightly different to your average chap, or even chapess. And so the people that I meet along the way, they're characters in their own sense. I mean, what can I say? I mean, they're not just the average people. And the average experiences that I have are just not average either. It's always slightly beyond, a little bit over the top. And I suppose that's why I've had the problems with, in the past, say, British government and military, because even they can't understand the level that I go to, or is thrust upon me sometimes. I mean, okay, admittedly, in life I've gone looking for it, and I've found it as well. But at the same time, I've also been, it's pulled upon me. I find myself in weird scenarios and situations far beyond what the average person would class as the norm. And so I live this slightly peculiar life. I suppose peculiar lifestyle as well. And for me to go back and engage with normal lifestyle, with the normal elements, it's been shown and it's been proven that I find that difficult somewhat. There is more to life than just me being sat here in front of the camera speaking to you now. There is so many elements to this reality. Elements that over the years now I'm becoming more and more and more aware of, consciously and subconsciously. It's not the world we think it is. It's certainly not the world in which I was brought up in. It's just not. There's so much more to it. It's so complex, in fact infinite, that it takes some understanding. And it takes a certain person to be able to comprehend what they can at that time. But sometimes it's easier to be in extreme scenario and situation. Maybe a soldier out there could relate to this, where you concentrate on the job in hand, and it's extreme scenarios that you get involved with. And you're asked to deal with, and you can concentrate because you train the mind in concentrating on that job in hand at that time. So you deal with that reality. Strange things occur, and you find yourself across a border somewhere, or picking the body parts up of dead people, looking after a friend who's in trouble. But you deal with it. You crack on with it, and your life's in danger, as it were, and other people's lives are in danger, and hopefully you're making a difference in their life. But you can deal with that because what you do is you switch off to the rest of the world, and you don't worry about Bob the goldfish. You forget about goldfish, and you just crack on with the job in hand. When it's over, you go back, and possibly you might have a beer, and then you're asked to go back to this false reality, which is normal day society. Now, I'm not saying that normal day society is wrong, because it's not. I think, if I could have been accepted within normal day society, then my life wouldn't have gone the way it has. Possibly. But the problem is switching off that extreme element and going back to the norm. It's very difficult for some anyway to be able to comprehend that element. And that's one of the problems I have is... So that's why I shut myself off and went and lived in a jungle. Closed myself off to the normal rigours of normal day life and society. I went and lived with the tribe in the jungle, and I went back to the basics because I needed to keep it basic. Because as much as society goes about its normal everyday life, you have to be able to conform and play within that societal role, wherever you may find yourself. And if you're not very good at conforming or bullshitting or just generally being a heartless bastard, you know, even if you come across as a nice guy in society, the best way to piss people off in this world is tell the friggin' truth, and people don't like the truth. When it comes down to the majority don't want to know the truth. And what is the truth? I mean, it's all about perception, isn't it? You know, how one perceives their own reality is what one would class as reality. You know, for themselves. You step outside the fishbowl that most people put themselves in. You go and explore this, and turn around and say, hey, you know, I got chased by a black rhino one time in Africa. Or, you know, I went across a border, or someone tried to chop my head off one day, or I did this or I did that. They're just going to turn around and think you're completely nuts. And it's a fair one. So you keep your mouth shut and you try and contain it. But the problem is I still find myself now in partly with normal day society, but I'm unable to express myself in a way in which doesn't freak people out. Now, earlier on I was talking about this relationship I had with this lassie. And, you know, I was really screwed over there in a lot of ways, and I suppose in some ways I screwed myself over. But what we had was a conflict of interest. The conflict of interest and misunderstandings that we gained between us was the fact that when people are brought into my reality and they deal with my reality and they become a part of my reality, most of the time it's beyond their capacity of what they understand as reality, because it goes far, far beyond. I turn around and say, hey, I'm going to go and meet with the Russians. I'm going to go across a border and meet up with someone from a high-ranking level of another country, or whatever it may be. It's a little bit peculiar. I realised that in a lot of ways I was cold dead inside, and I have been. I've written about that in my books and my journals for many years, how I shut myself down to society, and I also shut myself down to myself. Now, what that does is that's great, because like I can deal with an extreme element, for instance, you know, being on a tour of duty or something like that. But what it does, and it leaves me in an adequacy of being able to deal with the norm scale, you know, the normal average day scale, and I forget about myself as well. So what it did was, in this relationship, I missed out on some fundamental factors, which was understanding myself. I forgot about who I was. You know, who is Jigger? You know, what makes him tick? And something that has come to, how do I say? Something that's become more obvious now is that I lost the capacity to love. In fact, one would say that for 38 years, I never gave myself the capacity to love anybody, including myself. In fact, it was self-hatred. It was the element of complete expendability, and almost a wish to die. because I wasn't in touch with me. Now, when we talk about the universe and we talk about universal laws, in a way, one would say that, or some would say that actually cause and effect, and we create our own realities. In fact, one could say that actually we are the universe itself, because in a lot of ways all this energy is just all combined. It's everything and nothing. So I am everything and nothing. And through everything and nothing, if the elements of the yin and yang are left out, the balance between light and darkness, good and evil, right and wrong, there are universal laws where we know that's right and that's wrong. But there are sometimes it's finding this element of balance that's key. Balance and acceptance. And balance and acceptance is all about oneself as well. Finding that balance is within oneself. I didn't have that balance, and so it became quite obvious. But then again, neither did the other side to the relationship that I had either. So it wasn't all just one-sided. But what I thought I was doing was trying to help a situation. Actually, in some ways one could say that I made the situation worse as well. So at every level it's important to understand that element of balance. And again, it's perception. It's how we perceive, and putting away the ego and this element of fear. So for me, having never loved and accepted love in my life, for the first time I opened up to it. And it left me in a position where I became vulnerable. And I suppose I'm not very good at being vulnerable because of my background. That vulnerability led to the element of fear taking over. And through fear, it caused negativity, and it caused an imbalance within the universe, within me, within the reality in which I was a part of. And thus I find myself sat in this room, speaking to this camera, alone again. There's an old saying is you're born alone, you die alone. So that was something that I guess I've always known about myself, is even though I've realised now that I do have a capacity to love, this word love, I didn't understand before. I'm talking about finding the balance between fear and love. Realistically, that's what we're looking at. Okay, so what's my point? My point being is an awful lot has happened, and I'm not sure what's going to happen in the near future. Although I've got projects going on at this moment in time. I just had a text message from a buddy of mine saying that the project's being put forward to the president of a country. I know that sounds bizarre and probably think me mad as well, but that's way out there. I've got a project where if I can confirm it, I might have found an unknown species, or even break the element of physics. Through the flying rods. That sounds bizarre, doesn't it? Yeah, I suppose it is bizarre. Like I said, what I do is sometimes that little bit beyond. My point is, things change. I change. As human beings, we're dynamic in our nature. And it's always, I think, important to assess oneself, to move forward on this journey, this sphere that we are. I class it as a sphere, and inside we are this sphere travelling down this pathway. And anything can come in, and it's constantly moving, and as we move we experience, and dependent on our strength at that time, our energies, our thought processes, dependent on how these experiences that we have in life affect us. And when we talk about affect, we talk about emotion as well. Emotion is a key factor in life, and this experience, and it's being able to control these emotions, not suppress the emotions. Suppression isn't, I would say, a good thing, but it's understanding and not allowing an emotion like fear to override the other elements and the balance, and it's trying to keep the balance at all times. So it's a shifting element all the time. We have to shift, we have to be able to adapt, we have to live, and we have to learn. I guess what I'm saying is this is a reminder to myself in a lot of ways that I've got as far as I've got to at this moment in time in my life. I don't know how long I've got in this third dimensional plane of reality. Maybe not long, maybe not long. I'm not necessarily going to worry about that. But what I will say is that as I continue on in this process of learning, I will continue to try and gain what's necessary in order for me to be able to keep the balance within the third dimensional reality that I see outside, but also within the other etheric plane. It's a spiritual war in which we're a part of. This isn't me, this is just the avatar body I find myself in. My mind is my connection to what is really out there, which is, I guess, the universe. I guess, the light source, or whatever source I come from, the universal effect. I suppose it's everything experiencing whatever it can do at every moment, on every level, on an infinite scale, at the same time. But that gets broken down and compartmentalized, and we have the friggin' extraterrestrials out there, spiritual beings, connections, this, that and the other. If I just played it down to watching football on a Sunday or Saturday, I'm not really pushing myself to maximum potential. So what I do is I explore outside the realm in other borders. And I guess that leaves me slightly detached from the normal everyday society. Here in Borneo, if someone finds out you're from UK, the first thing they ask is, oh, what's your football team? What team do you support? And I have to turn around and say, to be honest, I really couldn't give two hoots about football. And they look at me strangely. It's like, wow. But then again, if they'd grown up in the UK, especially the UK I did, in the years that I grew up, looking the way they did, they wouldn't be giving a hoot about football either. They'd be too worried about getting spat on, or someone trying to beat the shit out. So that's what I learned. I just learned to fight back, defend myself, and sometimes put out the offensive, because sometimes that's needed. But in the end, what we've got to do is we've got to refer back to the reality that I still find myself in this human controlled reality, where it's not controlled by them at all. It's actually controlled by outside sources that manipulate the human beings in how they perceive their reality. Unfortunately, I see that, and I get that, how human beings are being manipulated But I have to deal, because I have to walk around as a human being in normal everyday society. I've got to somehow try and contend with dealing with being asked, what football team I support. Whereas realistically, if you're worried about your football team or what country I come from or what colour I am or what religion I am, you're missing out on the bigger picture, which is the earth is being systematically destroyed and human beings are being murdered off. And there is a war going on of your very mind, body and spirit. And in this process I find myself in, there are many ways in which I am tested, many ways in which I am attacked, and many ways I'm helped as well. And that's quite fundamental, because there are good and evil forces within this reality. As we are ourselves, we can all be hideously twisted and deformed in our own selves, but at the same time we can show the goodness and light. We all have these capacities and capabilities. Again, it goes back to that element of balance, finding that balance. And sometimes we get offset of this reality, and I want to remind myself at a later date, and maybe this will help others, to be able to refer back to the point of balance and understanding oneself and to the world itself. What we see is holographic. What we are, sometimes we often don't know truly who we are, because we are something else. We're not just Jigger in Sabbath. There's a bigger picture going on, and that needs to be looked at and taken into consideration. So on this Saturday, I sit here, I look and talk to this camera, and I just hope that there is hope left in this reality, and that I hope that I can shine a bit of positivity out there, shine a bit of the light, the goodness to others, and that there is hope in mankind and to us all, where we can push forward and start to expand our minds, our bodies and our spirits, and just let the love shine, let the light shine. Not a demonic light, I'm talking about just the light force. And let's try and keep the balance and gain the balance, keep our heads